Good day to everyone. Today I will be presenting the paper Designing Sustainable Mobility for People at Risk of Social Isolation, Two Cultural Perspectives from Singapore and France. My name is Penny Kong and I am presenting this paper on behalf of my co-authors today. The agenda for today, I will be starting with a background of the collaboration, followed by the context and problem statement. I will then go through the state of the art on design methods and then present the methodology and results from Singapore and France and conclude with a summary of the paper for today. As a background to how this paper came about, basically THENG Create in Singapore and IRT System X in France are both working on design research and autonomous mobility separately. And in Singapore, we have LKYCIC and NTU who are focusing on aging urbanism and older adults and technology adoption, respectively. So the two main branches of expertise that you see here would be on human-centric design of future mobility and the well-being of older adults in cities. So we tried to bring these two areas of focus together to write this paper. So the problem that we are facing today globally is that of aging populations. So in Singapore in 2015, about 20% of people were aged 60 or over. This figure is projected to increase to 30% in 2030 and eventually to 40% in 2050. In France, there is a similar story. There are 25% of people who are aged 60 or over in 2015. And this number is projected to increase to 30% in 2030 and 32% in 2050. This is a problem that is exacerbated by the following. Firstly, 46% of people aged 60 and above live with a disability. Secondly, in Singapore, about 9% of older Singaporeans live alone. This was a figure from 2011, and the trend of older Singaporeans living alone is on an increasing trend, despite this Asian societal norm of seniors living with their children. In France, already about 87% of older French live alone or with a spouse only. So there is a difference between the French and Singaporean cultures here in that in France and in a lot of countries in Europe, it is kind of normal, expected that older people will continue living independently by themselves in their old age. However, this problem in Singapore is that because there's this expectation that seniors will live with their children, it is actually a source of shame and a greater source of anxiety when older people do not get to live with their children in their retirement years. So in this paper, we are referring to older adults with disabilities as people with reduced mobilities. Now, this is a group of people who would benefit greatly from improved and new technologies in mobility services because these can improve comfort and convenience. For instance, with ride-hailing services on your smartphones, you can easily get door-to-door travel. Or with the future of autonomous vehicles, perhaps more people will be enabled to actually have a vehicle that can take them from their origin to destination. However, the problem that we see here today is that older adults are less likely to adopt new technologies, and this could be due to the pace of innovation coupled with new technologies, which they are perhaps unwilling or unfamiliar with, and so they don't use it. As such, they risk being left behind. And this is the group that we're targeting here today in this paper. It is people who then, due to their reduced mobilities, they are at risk of social isolation. What is social isolation? Basically, it's limited exposure to the social aspects of everyday life, and this is actually linked to spatial isolation, whereby not being able to access other spaces actually leads to people having a lack of interaction with other people, which could then in turn lead to cognitive decline, depression, or even increased rates of mortality. What we propose is that mobility is a way to reduce social isolation by helping people connect both physically to other spaces as well as in turn giving them this opportunity for social participation by enabling them to travel out of their homes and into more social spaces outside. Public transport here is the focus because it's an alternative for seniors who face financial issues or who have difficulties driving in their later years. So what we hope to present today is a new approach to designing mobility, and we hope to do this by firstly taking human-centered design approaches and methods combined with universal design principles in order to design inclusive mobility that is more sustainable for urban environments in the future. So there are two methods that we will be looking at. Firstly would be personas, which focus on the major needs of specific user archetypes in order to better fulfill these needs and help designers by clustering and prioritizing similar needs across personas. The second method that we'll be talking about are design workshops, and these help to enable a participatory approach because they can be conducted with designers or with your target user groups. So you can involve the community in your design. In Singapore, there's actually a move towards qualitative approaches to understand users. Local agencies try to engage the public through online surveys and focus group discussions. However, one limitation of these online recruitment strategies is that it's hard to reach subjects who are non-tech savvy and also limits our sample to those with internet access. In France, elder personas have been developed through interviews with seniors. So what happens is these personas contain attributes such as the profile, age, capabilities, and habits. And they also focused on distinguishing the different groups within the main group of senior citizens. So what they try to do is distinguish the ages that are not just biological, but also, for instance, psychological and physical. Some activities that you can co-design with seniors are, for example, there was this workshop which focused on designing a tricycle with seniors. And there was another one which focused on developing digital service prototypes, which you can see on the right, to help seniors better access facilities and services that they may need in their daily lives. Moving on to the methodology in Singapore, what we tried to do here was to diagnose mobility situations with the objective of understanding the issues faced by users on public transport today. And with this data, we combine key attributes with contextual information to build personas. For the methods, we targeted a study population of public transport users from vulnerable populations, and we collected data through mixed methods of semi-structured interviews and shadowing. We used these two methods so that we could obtain both conscious and unconscious insights. So unconscious insights are thought processes and behaviors which the user may not be aware of him or herself and may not explicitly mention in interviews, for instance. So we can obtain these unconscious insights through third-party observations of repeated and or atypical behaviors. For the results, we reached a sample of 16 people who were either physically impaired or visually impaired. For visually impaired people, there were both cane users and guide dog users. From the interview results, we found some practical insights into important details for traveling. For instance, one wheelchair-bound participant only started traveling out of the house more often when this downtown line opened on the MRT. So this was a new metro line which opened in Singapore in 2017. And the reason for this was due to more universal design features being available on this line. For example, the smaller gap between the platform and the vehicle. The problems hindering people with reduced mobilities are not limited to the service itself. Another example we found was that when lifts leading to the stations broke down, wheelchair-bound participants were simply unable to even go to the MRT stations. From the shadowing, we had our researcher follow one subject around. So this was a visually impaired male who was a guide dog owner. There's an illustration on the right of what this might look like. And we found some unconscious insights which really revealed like the intricacies of mobility as a person with reduced mobility. For instance, the subject actually found a seat on the train quite easily with the help of his guide dog, but he actually took more time to feel around the seat with his hands to orient his body and settle into the seat. So this was an observation that the researcher noticed that the user was not aware of. The second example was that the guide dog actually brought the subject to the escalators successfully with instructions, and unfortunately the escalators were moving in the wrong direction, and the subject had to rely on a fellow passenger to steer him in the right direction. So some key insights from our Singapore study was that there's actually a need for more time when it comes to traveling for people with reduced mobilities, as well as a reliance on other people while traveling. To illustrate the key needs that we found, we actually developed this persona named Peter Tan, who's 72 years old, who relies on support aids such as the walking stick or handrails within the home. Now, his travel is restricted to his immediate neighborhood because he has to use a wheelchair to extend his travels beyond the neighborhood. But this reliance is a hassle and it causes a lot of anxiety due to the unpredictability of traveling on a wheelchair on public transport. And Peter Tan, at 72 years old, he has a smartphone, but he's not too familiar with how to use it. Therefore, he only uses it for phone calls. And this further limits his ability to find out information on, for example, travel routes. Moving on to the French study. First, we have the design workshops that were based on personas. So this was a 3-hour design of mobility experience workshop where 15 participants from different backgrounds, so we had students, mobility professionals and researchers, as well as industrial designers coming together. And they worked on this brief, which was titled How to Design Desirable Solutions for Shared Mobility While Restoring Social Links in Everyday Life. The objective here was to uncover ideas for situations where people will be eager to share their mobile life with others. Let me take you through this development. So there was a 4-phase development of personas. The first was where participants chose one persona from predefined categories, such as shares, does not share, and shares without awareness. In the second stage, they actually created the personas and used things such as profiles and a user journey map, which you see on the right here, to kind of describe the kind of thoughts and sharing moments that occur throughout this persona's day. In the third phase, they tried to detail moments based on the family and social situation. For example, if you are traveling out of the house in the morning, you may be going out with your family members who are going to work or to school, which will be different from when you're traveling out in the afternoon when you're alone in the house. And the last phase was to design based on the sharing moments as creative prompts. And the goal here was to alleviate social isolation. So here are some of the results of the persona development. There were 5 personas defined of various ages and who belong to different categories. So the first is Pierrette, who's 64 and who does not share, and who has impaired mobility and arthritis of her limbs. The rest are similar that they also do not share or they unconsciously share, and some of them are non-tech savvy, some of them are younger, and some of them are more independent. So today we'll be focusing on Pierrette, who was used as a prompt for one of the design solutions. The students then applied radical innovation design to the persona as a prompt and came up with this idea of movement, which is a ride-sharing concept dedicated to elderly people. So movement means movement, move, and mood. And here the aim was to connect 2 types of user profiles. The first are elderly people who are non-sharers, and the second are sharers in your neighborhood who are ready to help. So the idea is that this easy-to-use device will help seniors counter the reluctance towards technology by connecting them more easily to people and services in your neighborhood. In conclusion, what we want to do is consider key needs in the following. Firstly, in mobility design guidelines and operational planning. Secondly, in extending the scope of planning, firstly beyond the mobility service, and secondly, to perhaps include interactions between passengers and user dyads. And finally, we want to consider these key needs, which is the need for more time and the reliance on other passengers, on the design of future mobility systems, such as autonomous vehicles. And we hope to see benefits in, firstly, inclusive mobility to enable more independence, and this leads to greater overall sustainability and quality of life in urban environments because we can get more people to use public transport, which will hopefully lead to reduced car usage and less pollution in urban environments. Some further work that we will be conducting together among these four institutes will be to continue this Singapore-France collaboration by developing firstly a virtual companion for autonomous vehicles, which will help to address the absence of a human driver in future. We want to continue conducting design workshops with personas, as well as compare these personas to determine what design actions we can conduct, and furthermore conduct bilateral usability tests between the two countries once we have developed concepts and solutions, so we can compare the results. Thank you very much for your attention.